Top story this hour, Thailand's Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha calls for talks with protesters as anti-government demonstrations continue for a fourth day. The pro-monarchy PM said that he is concerned that these rallies will be used by troublemakers to instigate violence. Protesters have been demanding Prayut's resignation. Thousands of anti-government protesters took over key intersections in Bangkok, defying a ban on protests with chants of downward dictatorship and reform the monarchy.
เราอยากเป็นส่วนหนึ่งในการเรียกร้องประชาธิปไตยในครั้งนี้ครับเพราะว่ามันเป็นโอกาสของเราแล้วในเมื่อทุกคนออกมาเราก็ไม่มีอะไรต้องจะกลัวนะครับแล้วก็วันนี้คือเราเห็นสถานการณ์ก่อนหน้านี้ว่าทุกคนก็ชุมนุมกันอย่างเป็นระเบียบเรียบร้อยอันนี้คือมันบ่งบอกว่าเขาทุกคนเป็นประชาชนนะครับคือมันไม่มีความวุ่นวายเกิดขึ้นเลยความรุนแรงที่เกิดขึ้นจากทาง
Demonstrations have persisted despite the arrest of dozens of protesters and their leaders, the use of water cannons and shutdown of much of Bangkok's metro rail system as well. The police made no immediate steps to intervene as protesters took Bangkok's most important transport hubs. The police also refused to reveal their deployment plan as protesters prepare for another rally.
I can't say that because it depends on the situation basically. The situation is really dynamic at the moment. So I can't, there is no formula as to what we do or what we not to do. But what we can say now is to warn the public as to what is the law. This is what they have to follow the law. Failure to do so, we have to enforce the law accordingly. It depends on how the situation has evolved.
Meanwhile, Thai King Maha Vajiralongkorn attended a graduation ceremony as protests against the monarchy continued in the capital Bangkok. Thousands of students are defying the law which makes criticizing or insulting the monarchy a criminal offence. And now joining us live from Bangkok is Phil Robertson, who is the Deputy Director at Human Rights Watch Asia Division. Thank you so much for joining us. Thailand's Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha has called for talks with protesters now. This as anti-government demonstrations continue, as you know. How do you see these talks panning out?
Well, it's not clear that the talks are going to have any substance at all, or even who is invited. At the same time that the government is saying that it wants to have talks with protesters, it's also moving forward with an order to censor and perhaps ban at least 5 media outlets that are reporting from the protests, including Voice TV, Prayut Thai, the Reporters, the Standard, and the Free Youth, the actual group that are organizing these protests. So, you know, if he's talking about having a dialogue, gagging one side through shutting down media outlets is not a good way to start.
Also, I think what's so important is that protesters have been demanding the resignation of Prime Minister Chan-o-cha. So what can we expect in that regard?
Well, you know, there is 3 major demands, and one of those is the resignation of the Prime Minister. I think that if the government was prepared to seriously consider one of the other demands, which is an amendment to the Constitution, and the other demand to stop abusing the rights of protesters, then there would possibly be a real dialogue, a substantive dialogue. But the government has shut the door to constitutional amendments right now. They basically are studying proposals that were at the parliament, but no one believes that those proposals are going anywhere fast. So the government has yet to prove that it's sincere in its saying that it's going to actually talk with the protesters.
And now that you've mentioned it, that's actually what I was going to come to next. What can you tell us about the likelihood of a reform?
Well, I think it's very possible that if both sides sit down and talk through some of these issues, particularly about the Constitution, that it's possible to make some progress. But the reality is that the government has not been listening. The government has been focusing on how to disperse these groups, how to try to control the groups, how to silence their spokesperson, how to arrest their leaders. You know, there's really no sign of good faith from the government that they're sincere in considering any sort of reforms whatsoever.
All right, Mr. Robertson, thank you so much for joining us with all those details.